Welcome to the Pucks with Haggs podcast, a proud member of the CLNS Media Network. Make sure to hit subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel and turn on notifications for when a new video drops on the channel. The show is also brought to you by PrizePicks, the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks. Run your game. All right, welcome in, everybody. Thanks for listening to the 219th episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. I, as always, am your host, Joe Haggerty. You can find my work at joehaggerty.substack.com. Subscribe and get yourself a premium membership. Get all of my Bruins and NHL writing sent straight directly to your inbox. I also write columns weekly for the Boston Sports Journal, and I do a weekly Q&A with the subscribers there. So subscribe to the Boston Sports Journal at bostonsportsjournal.com. Some great stuff there on all the four major pro sports in Boston, including guys like Greg Bedard, Mike Giardi, and a lot of talented others as well. So definitely check that out. This week, we'll be doing a mailbag episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, a Labor Day weekend edition of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, where I will be answering some of your questions, and we will get right into that. But just wanted to say, as hockey gets started, as school gets started, thanks for hanging with me over the summer, which has been not as active since July 1 for the Boston Bruins and, development camp and kind of they know what they've got. They have their roster. They're going to look at it in training camp, but it's been a little slow to start this year with a lot of anticipation for what we're going to see when training camp starts. The good news is that Boston Bruins captains practices will be starting next week. That's right. There will be a couple of captains' practices. There will be availability with players. The Bruins players have filtered into Boston. The wheels are starting to go now. There will be captains' practices next week. The week after that, there will probably be the golf tournament, and then the rookie training camp gets going, and the Prospects Challenge out in Buffalo. And then NHL camp is going to be here before you know it in a couple of weeks. So things are really going to start getting going. At this point, now that we're at the end of August, the dog days of summer and the off season are gone. Everybody's back from their cottages and things are happening now in the hockey world, and we will be here for it. This week, not a ton Bruins news wise. They released their the national television schedule, which I believe had 15 games or so, something like that. Maybe it was closer to 20, but it was somewhere in the 10 to 15 to 20 range. The first one will be their opening night on the road against the Washington Capitals. I believe that was Wednesday, September 8th, I think, or October 8th, excuse me. And there'll be a bunch of other dates. The Black Friday game against the Rangers on Friday afternoon at the Garden, the day after Thanksgiving, will be one of them. The Stadium Series on February 1st against the Tampa Bay Lightning at Raymond James Stadium down in Tampa, where the Buccaneers play. That will be one as well. But there'll be a bunch of games. The Bruins will be on TV quite a bit. That will give you a chance to complain if it's on ESPN and you have to go to ESPN.com or ESPN Plus to actually watch the game. I'm sure there will be some of those this year. And that trend is not going anywhere. I can tell you right now. We can complain all we want about paying for NESN, paying for all these other things, and then having to pay these streaming services. But that's the way it's going. It's not going in the other direction. So if you want to watch the Bruins every single day, you got to have all these different streaming services and channels. And, I for one, I have them all now because I did the right thing for me and I cut the cord. And that's something that I was hesitant to do. I mean, I worked for Comcast for a long time when it was part of NBC and Comcast Sportsnet and all that. So I did not want to do it, or I held out on doing it. And I wish I had done it a couple of years before now that I've done it. And I just pay for streaming and have, I think it's Fubo and some other stuff. And basically can watch anything that I want and haven't missed, I think, a single thing that I had on cable. So, that's my little aside for right now. But anyway, we are going to... That's about it, though, the national television schedule. From that, we're going to jump into the mailbag and answer some questions. As we know, the Bruins are going to get going soon, so this stuff is going to start getting real really quickly. All right. The first couple of things I'm going to read are reactions to something I wrote this past week on Boston Sports Journal, where the Bruins got the 20th ranking in the NHL pipelines by The Athletic. A couple of years in a row, they had been dead last, 32nd in the NHL in terms of the talent pipeline, the draft and development talent pipeline, and the way they were doing things with their young players. And that had drawn a lot of heat around Boston from people saying that they were terrible at drafting and developing and they hadn't produced any players. And even the national hockey people think so, and the draftniks and the prospect gurus and all these other people, the Corey Pronmans of the world. Well, apparently the Bruins aren't as bad anymore as they were, and they've improved. And those national prognosticators and pontificators have noticed. And now they are the 20th ranked team in the NHL out of 32, which still isn't fantastic. It still isn't something to beat your chest about, but it's better, and it shows marked improvement. And this is what they said in the overview. Recently, Boston was back-to-back at the 32nd spot in the pipeline rankings a couple of years later, with some non-late first-round picks developing well, and especially after drafting James Haggs, the system is now respectable. Outside of Haggs, though, there isn't much in the system that has upper half of the lineup potential. And certainly they were helped by trading for Will Zellers and Fraser Minton at the deadline, bringing in some prospects, as well as the draft picks, and then the great draft that they had this past June with Haggs at the top, but a number of strong picks that have really bolstered their prospect cupboard and the amount of talent that they have, which was apparent. And we talked about this earlier this week. It was apparent at development camp that they had taken a step up talent-wise. They'd brought in a bunch of really good young players. The development camp was much more youthful and much more skilled and much better skating than it had been in the past. And that was apparent. I was only there for a day and I noticed it. And the other people that were there all week noticed it very quickly and consistently. And that's what happens. Like, it's markedly different when you see that kind of talent level filtering in, and it's just a different class and level of player that's coming in, rather than a lot of undrafted free agent types that you're looking at to potentially sign to contracts. You have guys you drafted high in the draft class that are coming in with skills that some other people don't have and a lot of other players don't have. And James Haggs was one of those guys. I think Will Moore definitely was impressive to a level. And there were others. The kid they drafted from Minnesota that was the Cooper Simpson, I think his name was, the scoring champ in Minnesota in high school hockey. Another one that I thought was really good. Even their defensemen that they drafted were excellent as well. So just a really strong crop of talent that came in, and noticeable to the people that pay attention to these things. So the first question or reaction is from Sponge Ruiner on Twitter, who says, after I wrote complimentary things about the Bruins pipeline rankings and them improving, he wrote, "If Sweeney and Neely kidnapped you and forced you to write this, send the code word. I'll send help." I had to include that because that's funny. All right. Yeah, I appreciate that that you're concerned for my safety. But like, the point I was making is not that they've completely turned around the pipeline and that it's like one of the best in the NHL or that everything is rosy. That's not what I wrote, and it doesn't whitewash what happened in the past either. The point of it is that there's improvement and that there's a trend. They're getting better and they're going in the right direction. And I think it's notable when national media types and the the prospect guru types that notice this stuff, take note of it and, change their sort of narrative for that team. I think that's worth noting and that's worth writing about and talking about. And I think that's what's happening here, is it's not completely changed, and you're not going to see all of a sudden this wave of young guys come in this coming season and change things. But I think you're going to see the fruits of a very strong draft start to bear out over the next couple of years, 2-3 years. And I think it shows a trend towards them continuing to stock up what they have and build towards that and use that as a priority. And I think these are all good things. And these are things to be heartened by and be encouraged by, instead of having it all doom and gloom all the time. But what should I use as a code word? How about the code word will be Applejacks, since I'm up in Maine and I'm looking at a box of Apple Jacks that my kids were eating for cereal this morning. So the code word, if I am in trouble and I am kidnapped and I need help, will be Apple Jacks. Okay, Sponge Ruiner. So if you ever hear me say that from this point forward on the podcast, you know that I'm in trouble and I need your help. All right, let's move on to the next one. This is from Mike Downs 4. It's okay to hope that it ends up being a strong draft class, given where they were picking. Even so, that's one class named that no one will truly know about until 3 to 5 years from now. In my experience, there is no benefit to putting any stock, good or bad, in a draft from 2 months ago. Now, Mike Downs, I think it's fair that the grades that are immediately given out after drafts are overblown and their importance is pretty much nil because, to your point, it takes years for you to figure out who can play, who can't, who's going to develop into an NHLer, all of that stuff. It takes years to get to that point. But the one thing I will say is that it's somewhat okay to look into these players now and to put a little importance into the draft class now because of James Haggs and because he's probably going to be playing for the Bruins at the end of this year when he's done with his season at Boston College. So there will be tangible impact next season from one of the guys in that draft class. And the expectation is that that's going to happen. So I think there is credence to calling that impactful draft class sooner rather than later. And the other guys, Will Moore, the defenseman they drafted, the high school kid from Minnesota that I mentioned, a lot of those other players. Yeah, it's going to take a while for those guys to develop and become impact players and see their first NHL games. And it's going to take, to your point, 2 to 3 years probably from when you'll see a lot of those players. But the fact that they drafted a guy like Haggs, who is an impact guy and could be very quickly an impact guy, that changes, I think, a little bit of the perspective on the draft and how you're going to look at it. And it allows you to be a little more excited about a really good draft class, a significant draft class from this past year. If they end up getting 4 NHL players out of this draft class, which could be possible, that's a huge haul, and that is a great job by them if it ends up happening. And I think you can, and if it's headlined by a potential star player and a guy like Haggs, then it's all the better. Like, it's noteworthy. You have to acknowledge that and look at it and say, okay, they're onto something here. You don't want to put the cart ahead of the horse, but they also they've had a couple of okay draft classes. They've got some players that have filtered through, Mason Lohrei, guys like that, that are, beating down the door at the NHL level. And you have to acknowledge that as well, that I feel like the last 2 to 3 years, they've started getting better, and there's been an upward trend where they've made changes, obviously, and they've, not done the same thing over and over again. And it's starting to bear fruit to a degree. It's on a lesser level. And to the point in the summation of the Bruins pipeline, I don't know how many of these players have real star potential or top of the lineup potential, but, a guy like Haggs does, and at least they have one. Where they had none before. And they have some other players that are probably going to be able to, fill in as bottom pairing power play defensemen, as third line centers, as guys like that you need those kind of good players, quality players, if you're going to win. Even if they're not, 30 goal scorers and guys that are going to be number one centers or number one defensemen. So we'll see where it goes. But I just think, there's legit criticisms of the Bruins, certainly, and Cam Neely mentioned this when he kind of went off at a tangent about it back at the end of the season when they were, the management group was having their press conference. The 2015 draft is always going to put a little bit of a stigma and a little bit of a narrative that the Bruins are lousy at drafting and development because that first round was not good. And they clearly didn't handle it the right way and kind of botched it, to be honest with you. And it hurt them. I continue to think that part of the reason they didn't win the cup in 2019 is because that draft and not getting one of the impact players they could have had in that draft. And that means they have to start a guy like Carson Kuhlman in Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals instead of Kyle Connor or somebody like that. So there's legit things you can point at and say, there's reasons why, and there's damage done by them not getting the right players in the draft. in that particular instance. And there was a period, a very fallow period of 2 to 3 years where like they missed on first round picks. They missed on mid round players. It was, the Euro Vakanainens, that era. There was a 2-3 year run where they were drafting players like that just like don't look like NHL players, didn't look like first round picks at the time. Not sure what was going on there. But they struggled. And I think they're out of that. And they have been out of that for a few years. And you got to give them credit for that. You can't keep beating the dead horse of what they did years ago, even when they're doing things differently and they're starting to get positive results out of it. You need to acknowledge that. And I think that's what I did. And like I said, this particular draft class, I think you can treat a little differently because I think there's going to be an impact player potentially, maybe if the Bruins are knocking the door for the playoffs, he potentially might be there for them at the end of this season to help out. And I think that's very significant. All right, let's take a break here in the questions and answers to talk about our friends at PrizePicks, the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. And the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. Join over 10 million users and get started today. Instead of battling thousands of other players that could be pros or sharks, you simply pick more or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections, and you watch the winnings roll right in. It's fun, and it's super simple. On PrizePicks, you can mix and match player projections from different sports, combine your favorite hockey players and players from baseball, basketball, football, esports, and so much more. You can now win up to 2,000 times your money on PrizePicks. They also offer Venmo, MasterCard, and Apple Pay for quick and easy deposits into your account this sports season. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. And for those of you listening to this episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast, we ask that you subscribe to the podcast, like, and leave a review. For those watching the show on CLNS and enjoying all this hockey talk, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel, where you can find our show and a lot of other great Bruins content with fellow Bruins talkers like Conor Ryan and Evan Marinofski. There's also the CLNS Media Network and Celtics All Access on CLNS, the NBA History Channel, Patriots Press Pass, and the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channels as well. Also, please make sure to turn on your notifications so you know the exact instant a new Pucks with Haggs podcast video drops on the interwebs. All right, let's get back into it. And this is a good one. Any chance, which we've heard a couple similar to this, but I thought it was worth revisiting. Any chance of moving Korpisalo? Love to see if we have something in DiPietro before we lose him. I know his salary is a problem, but if we don't ask for much back, there's no sense in having him in a rebuild. Oilers ? And that's from JF Stanley. That was from our weekly Q&A chat at Boston Sports Journal. JF Stanley. I don't think there's any chance of moving Korpisalo. You talk about the salary being a problem. Yeah, the salary is definitely a problem, no question. The bigger problem is he didn't have a great year. Like, he had an okay start, and then he went in the dumpster along with the rest of the Bruins in the second half. And the problem becomes that Joonas Korpisalo, based on his performance the last 2 years, doesn't look like an upgrade over what the Oilers have right now, and doesn't look like somebody that is worth going out and trying to get when he's not an improvement over what they have in-house. And that's the problem. The problem is he becomes impossible to trade because you put the performance next to the salary, and that makes him untradeable unless the Bruins are, willing to give up like a first-round pick along with him to get some other team to take him because he's got multiple years left at a pretty good cap hit. So I think that's the practical reason. That's the bottom line reason why he's not going to get traded and he's not going to get moved, is he didn't play well enough last year that a team like the Oilers is going to, reach out and try to get him. I think the other part of it too is I don't want to trade Joonas Korpisalo because I think Jeremy Swayman needs that kind of veteran guy next to him to push him. I think he needs a partner that he's gonna feel a little bit of pressure. That if he plays well enough, he might take some playing time from him. And I think that is no reflection on Jeremy Swayman. I think that's the kind of situation that every goalie does better in a kind of competitive situation. I think it's where all goalies thrive. And I think, this situation is no different. Like, just look at where his best seasons have been and when he's played well. He had another guy next to him that had won a Vezina trophy before, whether it was Tuukka Rask or whether it was Linus Ullmark. He had legit very good goalies next to him. Joonas Korpisalo has been a very good goalie at the NHL level. So he's capable of doing that as well, especially if the Bruins, let's say Korpisalo plays really well in a game in the first few months of the season, right? And then it's expected the next start's going to be Jeremy Swayman's, but then they give it to Korpisalo because maybe he threw a shutout and played great. Then I think Swayman starts to feel the tug of competition there if he gets a start potentially taken away from him. That's something the Bruins didn't do in the first half of last year when Korpisalo was playing well, and it probably played into him not playing well in the second half. But I think that was a misstep, and that's something that they should have done, was leaned into Korpisalo a little bit if he was playing really well. And I know they were trying to get Swayman going and get him playing time and all that after the holdout. And there was a lot of other things that were going on with that team last year, hence why they were terrible in the bottom line of things. But I think one lesson learned by the Bruins last season was they probably should have played Korpisalo a little bit more, that Swayman is probably better with a veteran guy next to him that can push him a little bit, and that year 2 of Korpisalo Swayman should be way better than year 1 was. And if that happens after this year, maybe then you can look to trade Korpisalo. I don't think he's a tradable commodity until he plays well enough that another team is going to want him. And he didn't play that well last year, well enough for a team to step up and say, I'm going to take that guy, especially coming off a horrendous year that he had the year before in Ottawa. It's going to be a process to build up, maybe to trade him, to build up his profile again and build up his potential value, and then you can move him. The other part of this too with DiPietro, and I understand he had a really good year in the AHL. He was the AHL goalie of the year, and he was excellent in Providence. He was really good in the playoffs. I saw him play a few games in the playoffs, the AHL playoffs, the Calder Cup playoffs, and he was good. But the other part of it is that you can't put too much importance in DiPietro and trying to hold on to him. Just think about where we were with Brandon Bussey a couple of years ago, right? Everybody was worried about losing Brandon Bussey, and he's so valuable, and we can't lose him in waivers, and this is so important, and everything else. And look what happened to Brandon Bussey. He ends up washing out of the organization. Mike DiPietro basically fills in and replaces him and becomes the new it goalie in the Providence that could be the goalie of the future for the Bruins. And we're talking about a guy in DiPietro that's been in a couple of NHL organizations now. And sometimes goalies hit their stride in the mid to late 20s. They can be a late developing position. There's no question about it. So I think that is part of it, and that could be what's happening with DiPietro right now. But you also, I think, have goalies that have great years and then don't have great years, and that's part of the reason they're in the AHL. And I don't think we can make trades and maneuver things around and do all this stuff to try to protect DiPietro from being taken on waivers. Like, I just don't think you should do that as the Boston Bruins. I don't think you're going to risk your depth at the NHL level in a potentially good situation. It's not going to be 1A, 1B, but it's going to be able to push Swayman. I don't think you do that to try to protect a guy that is unproven at the NHL level, completely unproven. I think that's a mistake, and that would be a big-time mistake with an asset, and I don't think that's something the Bruins are going to do. So I think there's a lot of reasons why you're not going to see Korpisalo traded, and you're not going to see DiPietro be Swayman's backup, and those are just a couple of them. So I hope that helps. All right. This is from Mark Daniels. This is also from the Boston Sports Journal. Greetings, Joe. It seems the 1-3-1 defensive scheme has fallen out of favor in the NHL. That's basically the neutral zone trap. Why? The Tampa Bay Lightning in the early to mid-2010s were pretty effective with it under Coach Guy Boucher. If not all 4 lines, is there a line on the Bruins, in your opinion, that would employ this approach? Appreciate your thoughts. Thanks, Joe. And that's from Mark Daniel. Thanks, Mark. I always appreciate the questions from you, my friend. I think the easy answer why we don't see more of the strict trap is because players don't want to play it. It's not a fun system for players to play. It can be very effective. It can frustrate other teams. It can lull them to sweep. It can bore them into making mistakes. it's effective, especially if your talent level is not up to snuff. It can be a really effective way to play. But players don't enjoy it. It's not a fun system to play. I think you get a lot of complaints about that from the players. You get a lot of not buying into what's going on, and that can be a danger for coaches. I think it's hard for coaches to preach that to players and to get them to play that way, especially in an NHL that's increasingly built on speed and skill and goal scoring and making things happen. And the in vogue team right now is the Florida Panthers, who do not trap and just like forecheck the living crap out of you and really just like suffocate you with the forecheck and beat you into submission with the forecheck and soften you up that way. And that's the classic like way to win hockey games. And I think they do a really good job with that. And I think that's something that a lot of NHL teams want to use as a model, and that's how NHL players want to play for the most part. So I think that's why it has fallen out of favor, and that's why it's a tough sell. It's also really boring for the fans that are paying a lot of money to watch. And I know at the end of the day, they want a winning team, but like it's hard to sell a team that's just going to trap and try to win like low scoring games or, counter strike on mistakes that you're going to make. And that's their offense. Is there a line on the team that would employ that? Like, it's interesting. Naturally, you would say the fourth line would be a line that you might want to play that way. But I think if it's a fourth line of like Sean Corrali, Mark Kostelic, and Mikey Isamont, you're going to want them to forecheck. You're not going to want them to sit back and trap. Maybe if it's a third line of Fraser Minton and Jeannot and, anybody on the other side, whoever it's going to be, regardless of who it's going to be, maybe that's a line you could trap with part of the time. Like, I don't know. I don't know if Marco Sturm is going to trap and like put teams in the sleeper hold to start, especially if the talent level isn't up to snuff. I don't know what he's going to do. He may try to do some of that, and it may be a modified trap. It might not be a 1-3-1, but it might be a modified neutral zone look. It's kind of like what the Kings did. That he's going to employ in the beginning. And I think a lot of it depends on how the team looks in camp and how they feel like they're going to do going into the season. We'll see. But I think I would think it's not going to be one line playing that system if they're going to play that way. I think they would buy in as a team and play that way. And try to win low scoring games if that's what they're going to do. I have a hard time seeing Pasternak really locking down in a neutral zone trap. And, some of the Bruins players, I'm not sure if that's going to be long-term something that would be sustainable if they want to play that way. Maybe not. Maybe they trap 5-on-5 and then they draw penalties and they do their damage on the power play. And maybe that's part of the plan. We'll see when things get going. It's hard to tell right now when we haven't watched them skate. We haven't even looked at line combos or, defenseman pairings or anything. And I think we'll start to see that stuff over the next couple of days, or next couple of weeks, I should say. And things will be a little clearer at that point. All right. DJL_sports. Can you suggest 3 storylines worth following this season? Feeling despair about this team. I don't mind a bad team, and I admit this team isn't that bad. But I want a team that is developing something for the future, not seeing much of that, but maybe missing something. I do think they're developing for the future. I think this is a year where there's going to be a bridge element to the season. That's why they've brought in some of the gritty sort of like physical players, high effort players that they've brought in. Guys, they're going to hold places until other players are ready to step in. Victor Arvidsson's in the last year of his deal. I'm not sure he's a long-term guy that's going to be here. So I think there's some pieces that they brought in that might not be here for a long time. Obviously, Jeannot got signed to a 5-year deal, but I think they envision him protecting Haggs and these other young guys as they come up. And I think that's something you absolutely have to have and you really need on your team. So 3 storylines worth following. I think the number one and most important one is the rebound of Jeremy Swayman, the bounce back season, which everybody's anticipating. If he can bounce back, I think the Bruins are in good shape. Bottom line, if the defense stays healthy, if McAvoy and Lindholm stay in one piece, and if Swayman bounces back to be what he's been in the past, I think the Bruins are going to be much better than people think they're going to be. I think they're definitely going to be playing meaningful games in March and April, and they're going to push for a playoff spot in the Eastern Conference. I firmly believe that. If those particular things happen, because they still have David Pastrnak, they still have some talent that I think can make for a pretty good power play with Steve Spott drawing it up, and I think you're going to have probably 1 or 2 players that are going to pop and surprise a little bit and help more than you think, and I think that would turn into an encouraging season, not filled with despair, but filled with encouragement about this season and what's going to happen beyond that when they start adding some of these young pieces to what they've already started to build. So, but it all starts with Swayman. He has to be excellent. He has to benefit from being in a full camp, having, everything going right from a confidence standpoint and a preparation standpoint, and him just going into the season and playing the way that his talent dictates that he should. As long as he does that, I think he's going to be fine. Number 2 is the power play. I think Steve Spott is a very good coach. I think he's a good power play coach. I think the players are going to listen. He's going to have a mandate to come in and improve things and make changes and do whatever he needs to do. And I think the players are going to have to go along with that. And that could mean using Pastrnak as a decoy a little bit more than in the past. And that could include having Lohrei on point at the number 1 power play instead of a guy like Charlie McAvoy. I think there could be changes like that and things where they're thinking outside the box in order to get improvement and things that weren't working before. And I think that's something to be encouraged about. Like it was an ultimate bummer last year when they went on special teams and they just got worked by the other teams, both in the penalty kill and the power play. It's impossible to win in the NHL if your special teams are terrible, and they were dreadful on both ends. So I think the power play and that really coming back online and being very good is something to also feel excited about and feel like that's going to be a big component in this team coming back. And the third thing, storyline worth following this season that I mentioned was Boston College. Go watch some BC games and feel encouraged about what you're seeing there and what you could see on the ice by the end of this year and over the next couple of years in Boston. Like James Haggs is a storyline to watch this year in Boston, playing for the Eagles and very likely signing with the Bruins after his college hockey season is over and jumping right into the NHL. I think that's very much something worth being excited about and worth going and watching some BC games and getting encouraged by. Like, I think that is, and it's not just him, it's Andre Gassot, it's Oscar Jelvik, it's Will Moore, it is, there's a defenseman, I can't remember his name, Kostinsky, maybe? I can't remember his name. I'm going to have to look it up. And Dean Letourneau, another first-round pick that's on that team as well. They're going to have, I think 6 players on Boston College that are Bruins prospects. And that is excellent. That is well worth going to Chestnut Hill and going over to the Heights and watching some hockey games and seeing what the future is going to look like while they're still playing in college, especially Haggs, who should be a dominant player at the college level this year and should be really fun to watch. And then envisioning how he's going to fit at the NHL level and what he's going to look like with the Bruins. I think those are very much things to be encouraged by and not to despair about, really, when it comes down to it. I think there should be a lot of optimism with this Bruins team. I think they've figured out the long-term, maybe 2 to 3 year plan to turn things around. I think they are very much looking at the Washington Capitals as a model. When they hit rock bottom and traded away Orlov and Hathaway and all those guys to the Bruins a few years ago, and now look where they were this past season. They got back into the playoffs, and they look like they've got a really good structure in place around Ovechkin. So they did it the right way, and I think the Bruins took note of that and said, we can do the same thing. And I think they're in the midst of trying to do that same thing right now, which would tell you that this year might be a little bit of a stretch for them to make the playoffs, but I think they'll be competitive, and I think they'll push to the end. It could be a coin flip whether they get in or not, and it's too difficult to say right now whether they will or not, but I think they'll be in position to at least go for it and try to get it. I think that's encouraging. But I think next year they could be even, better, obviously. And they've got a lot of cap space going into next season with a loaded draft free agent class, and then Hagen's coming online as well. You're talking about adding a serious influx of talent where they could make a big jump next season, not this coming season, but the season afterwards. So that'll be interesting to watch as well. All right, let's take one more. Hi, Joe. Way too early to be discussing this, but it is the off season. Wonder if Mason Lohrei took a look at his plus minus numbers and now will be skittish and less aggressive in trying to improve his defensive zone play. The reason he is here is because he can push the puck and does have good offensive instincts. I hate to think the new coaching staff will try to tamp that down and dull his game to where he's just another body trying to protect the house and win a 2-1 game. Who do you think would be a good D partner for Lohrei, where he can continue to develop his offensive instincts while knowing he's got a D partner that can cover him? Even Claude Julien knew that he had to live with some of Torrey Krug's weakness early in his career to benefit from his elite offensive creativity. Lohrei is by no means in the same class as Torrey Krug, but I'm still hoping that they don't muzzle Lohrei too much, as he has a lot to offer offensively, and that's from KJ Forbes, 77. I think this is a good question, and this is something I talked with Mason Lohrei about quite a bit, or at least a couple times towards the end of the season. And I don't think there's any danger of him becoming less aggressive or skittish with the puck, or less thinking about making plays, or less looking to move the puck up the ice. I just think that's in his DNA. I think at this point, he knows what he is. He knows what he can do when he's at his best. He knows what he's best at as far as strengths as a player, and what he's not as good at. And I think and Torrey Krug was the same way. He felt like he was at his best when he had the puck and they were playing offensively and they were not trying to play defense. And the same thing with Mason Lohrei. I think with him, it's a couple things. It is time and place, game management, knowing when to take risks or when to, pinch on certain situations and knowing when not to. I think that's part of it. I think part of it too is his plus minus really took a beating last year after Lindholm and McAvoy got hurt, and he was pushed into playing 20 minutes a night, playing a top role, playing against the other team's best offensive players, doing stuff he wasn't ready for, where he'll get sheltered now. I think the best place for him in the lineup is with Andrew Peeke, and Andrew Peeke is a stay-at-home guy that can cover for him defensively, and they'll be, as a bottom pairing, will be in much more favorable situations, and I think it'll be a much better go for him playing with Peeke and playing in 15 to 16 minutes a night, maybe more if he gets a lot of power play time. But limited 5-on-5 looks where you're not going up against the other team's best offensive players. And I think that's going to help him immensely and tremendously. And I think that will allow him to build confidence and build back to what we saw a couple of years ago. And I think that's a big part of what we saw last season, was him pushed into something he wasn't really ready for and couldn't handle as adeptly, because he was pushed into a big role that they have other defensemen, better all around defensemen that are there to shoulder that and handle that when they're healthy. And that's a big part of the Bruins, if they're going to have success, is those guys being healthy to not push guys like Lohrei into bigger spots upward in the lineup. But getting back to your question, I don't think he's going to be skittish. I don't think he's going to be less aggressive. I think he's going to play exactly the same way. I don't think he's the kind of player that is going to lose his confidence and is going to have an identity crisis as to who he is or what he is. I think he understands he's not a defenseman that's going to slug it out around the net all the time. And if he's doing that, that's not where he is at his best. The other thing, though, that's interesting to me is that at least he's got some tools that Krug did not have. He's like 6'3", 6'4". He's a good-sized kid. Like he's got the size and strength to be able to win some of those battles and at least survive, where Krug did not. Krug would get bullied and pinned around the net. Same with Matt Grzelcyk when they got around the net. They were a liability, and they would consistently get worked over if they got anywhere close to the net. And if opponents could get them there and trap them there. So Lohrei, I think, can survive. And as he gets older and more experienced and wise to technique, stick technique, different positioning, things like that, he'll be able to survive those even better than he does now. And some of the mistakes in his game will be rounded out, and some of that confidence will, be back. I also think his role in the power play could tremendously lift his confidence and elevate his profile and how he views himself and his confidence with the puck and making plays and all that stuff. And I think he will get an elevated role on the power play, and I think he will be a featured player on the power play, and he should be. I think he's got the talent to do that, no doubt in my mind. So, yeah, I think it's a legit, very good question. I think it's something that with all young players, you've got to be concerned a little bit about their confidence level and, whether if they have a tough stretch or a tough season, if that's going to impact them long term. But I do not see that with Lohrei. I think he's a guy that I think is going to bounce back really well. And I still have a lot of belief in him as a defenseman and as a guy that maybe could still develop into a top 4 guy. With the right partner in the right situation, once he really gets going offensively and sort of, rounds out some of the risks and some of the things that he does with the puck that end up backfiring on him, as well as just, plain old fashioned work and rolling up the sleeves and getting the dirty work done in the defensive zone that all defensemen have to do from time to time. But I think the potential is there for him. I don't think there's any doubt about it. And it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. He's a key guy, I think, based on his power play acumen, to see what he does in training camp. And I'm going to be watching very closely a guy like Mason Lohrei once the Bruins do get to camp. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. That's another episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast that you've been listening. A proud member of the CLNS Media Network. Make sure to hit subscribe to the Bruins Rinkside YouTube channel and turn on notifications for when a new video drops on the channel. The show is also brought to you by PrizePicks, the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. Download the PrizePicks app today and use the code CLNS and get $50 instantly when you play $5. That's code CLNS on PrizePicks to get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't even need to win to receive the $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks, run your game. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening to this week's episode of the Pucks with Haggs podcast. We'll be back next week where we'll be talking about Bruins captains practices. That'll be very exciting, and anything that's developing from there. So until then, take it easy. Enjoy the start of hockey season right after Labor Day, and we'll see you then.